Welcome to Smalls Talks Balls, presented by Champions Round. And now your host, Steph Smalls.
But finally, we're back. We're going to talk about the Baltimore Ravens. And to join me is, let's make sure I do it right, Kevin Oestreicher, the host and producer of Locked On Ravens and managing editor of the Ravens WR. Make sure I said that right. How are you doing?
You got it all. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I nailed it. Awesome. I was nervous at first. It's always, you never know how it's going to go when people have more difficult names. So I'm excited to talk about these Ravens, finished with a very admirable 8-9 season after suffering, a whirlwind of injuries. We're talking the depth chart was nearly depleted even before we got to week 1. So a lot to talk about. I like to start with the draft. Why don't you give me your overview? How did draft go for you guys?
Oh, I loved it. Kyle Hamilton, there was no way I thought he was going to be there at 14. If you had asked me before, the Ravens are going to get Kyle Hamilton and they wouldn't have to trade up for him, I'd be like, no way. There's no way. And I thought when the Eagles traded ahead of the Ravens, it was going to be for Kyle Hamilton and not Jordan Davis. So I was ecstatic with that pick. He was a top 5 player in this draft for me. And then moving on, I was pretty surprised at the Marquise Brown trade. I won't lie. It was something that was kept under wraps. No one really knew about it. And then when it happened, you're kind of thinking, oh man, that's a big move because it was their number 1 guy, Lamar Jackson and Marquise Brown, very close off the field. So you're thinking, well, they're going to have to add a wide receiver at some point in this draft. They have 10 more picks and they don't add one. They go with 2 tight ends. They had Tyler Linderbaum with that 25th pick. But I like the value they got. They got Linderbaum at 25. David Ajabo, who, even if he doesn't play a snap in 2022, I think he's a first-round talent. So it's like you're trading a 2022 second for a 2023 first in that sense, because I think he was that first-round talent. So there's that. And then also Travis Jones, I thought was a second-round guy. Daniel Falele, I thought was a second-round guy. They had 6 fourth-rounders, and they used every single one of them. I didn't expect that. I thought they were going to at least package 2 of them and move up a little bit. But they had 11 draft picks, and honestly, I liked them all. Even the punter. I know the punter got a little bit of flack, but I think with Sam Cook retiring, it was a smart investment there.
Yeah, and the Ravens do historically overall draft well. I think they sit and they wait and they just let value fall to them. This was an unbelievable amount of value that fell to them. Like you said, Travis Jones, for example, he's someone that I had graded. I thought at one point he even could maybe get a first-round grade. There might be a team that goes and takes him at that, tail end of the first round. I thought at least second. So having him go, he might end up being that steal in this draft. I think everyone should definitely keep their eye out. And also, the Baltimore Ravens drafted one of the best safeties and centers that we've seen in a really long time. We'll go to, I want to talk about the Hollywood Brown trade. I don't want to jump away from that. Talk to me about that. Why was that surprising? And what does it look like? Are they going to add another vet? Because you would think so.
Yeah, you would think so. I personally am definitely in favor of adding a vet. I just think now with Marquise Brown out, their top 4 guys now are 2 second-year guys and 2 third-year guys. And number 1 is Rashod Bateman, who I love. In all fantasy leagues, I'm taking Rashod Bateman where I can get him. He's one of my guys, breakout, sleeper picks, whatever you want to call it. But there is a little inexperience there. Now, the guys in free agency aren't necessarily world beaters anymore. It's not like you have a guy who can come in and give you 100 catches, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, but they don't need that. If you can get 13 games out of a Julio Jones, because, the injury history is there, or a Will Fuller, or even a T.Y. Hilton, I think it's a veteran presence. It's fine. You're not asking to be the number 1 guy, but the Brown trade was a little surprising just because there wasn't really anything amiss. There wasn't really any indication that this was coming. There weren't any rumors or anything. And I think both teams kept it so under wraps that, when the trade was announced, Marquise Brown was already in Arizona attending the Cardinals draft party. And that caught Lamar Jackson a bit off guard. And he said that during his press conference a couple of days ago with the media. But now with him gone, Lamar Jackson, that's a 1,000-yard receiver now out the door. But it does take a specific type of wide receiver to want to play in Baltimore. I do understand that. This is a very run-heavy offense. The whole league has gone this whole pass-happy, air raid throw it offense, where the Ravens have gone the opposite direction. They're like, hey, we're going to run it 30 times a game.
And I love it.
It's amazing, and it works. But at the same time, if a receiver wants targets, they want yards and touchdowns in the stats, maybe an offense like a Kansas City or another high-flying offense is a bit better. So I think if a receiver wants to come to Baltimore and they understand that role, there are still targets to be had, but maybe just not as many from a pure numbers perspective. And Marquise Brown said the offense wasn't a fit for him. At the end of the day, that's his decision and his choice, and the Ravens helped him get to a place, obviously reuniting with Kyler Murray there in Arizona.
Yeah, and it's the most that they've really passed the ball since prior to Lamar taking over as the starter there. And I think there's something to be said. It's interesting as I went back and started looking at this draft, the Hollywood Brown trade happened, and then they were able to get Linderbaum, who is, he is going to be a very big part of their ability to establish the run game, his ability to just generate rushing lanes. And I think you'll see their offense switch back to a run first kind of offense, which we haven't seen. I also think there's maybe a little bit of an argument if Bateman could be more effective than Hollywood maybe was, maybe he's able to still get enough production, at least for us fantasy owners, out of him that makes everyone happy. But talk to me about the backfield, because this is one, and going back to fantasy, I mean, I had Dobbins, Gus. I got hit very hard all over the board, especially in my dynasty leagues. Talk to me what the backfield is going to look like and how they can go back to being that very strong, heavy running team that they are.
Yeah, a fantasy horror story for you is one of my friends actually traded Jamar Chase for Gus Edwards before the season started. No. And I felt bad for him because I was expecting huge breakout years from Dobbins and Edwards, and we all know how Jamar Chase did. That was phenomenal by him as rookie year. But it was Dobbins suffering the injury in the preseason. The Ravens only played their starters for one series in that game against the Washington Commanders, and it happened right. I think it was like the second to last play of the series. Dobbins goes down. You can never know with the NFL. Injuries happen any given time, any given point. But then the next week in practice, it was Marcus Peters and Gus Edwards going down pretty much on back-to-back plays in the same practice with torn ACLs. So then the Ravens also lost Justice Hill to another injury. So pretty much if they had entered the season as it was, and they did, they had no yards, touchdowns, carries from guys from 2020 because Mark Ingram was in Houston at that point. So they brought in like Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray and Le'Veon Bell, and they actually ranked top 5 in a lot of categories. But for those who watched the Ravens, it was not a top 5 rushing offense. They missed the big playability. And I was so excited for Dobbins in particular, also Edwards, but his second year breakout I thought was going to be huge. And I think what we saw from Jonathan Taylor, I think J.K. Dobbins could have been in that conversation. I mean, Jonathan Taylor had a phenomenal year, but he was in that second year breakout tier of guys who I thought was going to be amazing. I was taking him in all these fantasy leagues, and the injury happens. The backfield now as it stands, hopefully Dobbins and Edwards can, come back fully healthy, but we don't really know at this point. They're going to be easing into action. The Ravens, I think they're doing the right thing by taking the cautious approach. You don't want these guys back at like 75%. You want them more in like the 100% range before they get back and are actually there. So I think that for the Ravens, they brought in Tyler Badie in the 6th round. I thought was a 4th round guy, in my opinion. So again, another value pick. They also brought in Mike Davis. So it does really depend on what Dobbins and Edwards can bring to the table. But you're right. The Ravens did pass the ball a lot more than they did in 2019 and 2020. In those 2 years, 2019 and 2020, they were last in the league. In 2021, they ranked 9th. So I think they're going to get back to that run, bully ball style of offense. They drafted 2 tight ends in the draft. I think they're gearing up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're going to try to lean heavily back onto that running game that they always had. And like you said, I was going to bring up, I think they made a very sensible pick in taking Tyler, who, coming out of Missouri, I think easily could go as a 4th round grade. He's very speedy, nimble, has strong hands. He also gives you that special teams ability that, not every running back that you draft is going to give you. He has good pass protection knowledge. Not everyone agrees with that. I think so. But do you think he could be like their check down guy? Is going to fit more into special teams? Or do you think he could carve out a bigger role, I guess, in that backfield, depending on how these guys do coming back from an injury?
Yeah, I think if Dobbins and Edwards have to start the year on the PUP list, or they have to miss a couple games early on, you could see like a backfield by committee with Badie and with Davis. And fun fact, Tyler Badie and I actually went to the same high school for a couple of years. Really? So it was really cool to see him get his moment. And, he talked a bit about our school was known for lacrosse, and then he ended up moving down south to play football because the football team at our high school was, I'll just say, not amazing. But I mean, regardless, what Badie has is a skill from a skill set perspective. He can run, he can pass protect. I think his pass protection is good. And he actually made a couple plays in pass protection during mini camp. So he showed that off, but also as a pass catching back. And that's big because before Dobbins and Edwards went down, they were talking all about how they were going to throw the football to their backs and use the backs out of the backfield, screen passes, this, that, and the other. And then they couldn't really utilize it as much as they wanted to because the other running backs, like, their running back room last year would have been great 4 years ago, like when Devonta Freeman in his prime, Le'Veon Bell in his prime, but we weren't.
Yeah.
So I think for what the Ravens can do this year, if they have to use Badie as this like check down guy, maybe early runs on first and second, he can do it. He had a ton of yards, he was efficient at Missouri. But if the Ravens have to use him a bit more because they want to ease Dobbins into action, ease Edwards into action, I feel confident in that, especially if they have a veteran like Davis behind him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another interesting move that they made, and I always like what the Ravens do as far as I think they look for never having to go into a full rebuild. That's how they've kind of drafted. And something that they've done is they drafted 2 tight ends. Talk to me about how Isaiah Likely, who until the combine, even now there's concerns with drops. You can watch his tape. But until the combine, he was very heavily regarded. Everyone was very interested in him. But then they went out and they also got Charlie Kolar, who I think could be a very nice blocking tight end. How do they fit in there with the stud that is Mike Andrews?
Yeah, those 2 guys I think are going to have roles. And again, if the Ravens go back to the run style offense, they're going to be on the field. But the thing with Likely that intrigues me is he can line up all over the place. And people are saying we can put him on the outside. You can put him in the slot. You can line him up as a blocker. There were the issues about the drops, and that was a part of his game that I think he does need to improve. And I know there were rumblings. He did have a couple during minicamp, but there were also rumblings. He made a bunch of phenomenal plays, and Lamar Jackson talked him up. So whenever you get the Lamar Jackson endorsement, you're doing something right. Tyler Linderbaum also got that. So credit to him. But yeah, those 2 and Carler as well. I know people are excited. He said he looks up to Mark Andrews, and that's really exciting. But with the Ravens having Andrews and Nick Boyle in the fold already, they don't have to necessarily throw these guys into the fire and say, hey, you have to go out here and be like the biggest part of our offense. They have that already with Mark Andrews, and even more so now that Marquise Brown isn't there anymore. But I think you can see some 3 tight end sets, 4 tight end sets. They can get a little crazy with it, put Patrick Ricard in the backfield as well, and have maybe the big guys blocking up there for guys like Dobbins and Edwards and Jackson and all these players who can make things happen with their legs. And I think that for the tight ends, it's the play action game that you can feed off of as well, because if you can establish that run game and you're gashing teams for 8 yards a carry, 6 yards a carry on first down, they're going to see it on second down and be like, all right, everybody, go to the ball. And then Lamar Jackson pulls it in. It's what made their offense so effective in 2019 and how we saw that 14-2 season kind of come to fruition. So I'm excited to see what the tight ends can do. I'm excited about Likely and excited about Kolar.
Yeah, I'm excited about Likely too, because I was a little bit higher on him, and I think everyone has to remember he's not coming out of a school that we normally get these big names out of Coastal Carolina there. I think that there is a way that they can maybe even work him into the pass game. Is there a way that he could be a potential red zone weapon for Lamar, which I think is very possible. And I want to switch to the AFC North now, a little bit away from just the Ravens. Talk to me about the landscape of this division. What does it look like going into next year? Because it's a little bit different. The Steelers are in a very different place than they've been in a very long time. You have the Bengals coming off of a Super Bowl hangover. You have the Browns, who now, just depending on what happens with Watson, they have a new quarterback in there. Talk to me about this division.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most talented in football. I might give the AFC West a bit more love in my rankings there, maybe the NFC West too, but still super talented division. You're right, a bit of uncertainty surrounding the Browns right now in terms of what happens with Deshaun Watson, but I think that there is a lot of talent here. You mentioned the Bengals, they prove that they're here to stay. Joe Burrow is going to lead that team. Jamar Chase, that connection there. I think Cleveland has a talented roster. Myles Garrett has given the Ravens fit, and all other teams in the league, but the Ravens fits over the years, and they now are working in another wide receiver with Amari Cooper. You can't count out Nick Chubb as well. And the Steelers with Mike Tomlin, they're just always so consistent. You always think they're going to be like, oh, this is the year they're going to fall off and be bad. And then they're always good, or they always just are a solid team. So I think for now, what the Ravens are coming back into is they finished last in the division in 2021. They finished at 8-9, and that was the first time they missed a playoff since 2017, since the Bengals actually knocked them out in that Tyler Boyd reception that still gives me nightmares. But I think that when looking at just what they have compared to these other teams, I think they can hang with them. And I think the Ravens, it's almost like a forgotten thing with them. Like they feel forgotten, in my opinion, because, at the end of the year, they were playing guys 4 spots up on the depth chart, 5 spots up on the depth chart. And I never want to use injuries as an excuse, because every team goes through them. Every team deals with them, and some teams deal with them more than others. But you were getting to like week 16, and I'm like, what do you want me to do? They have like 25 guys out, and like they have all these other guys on the COVID list. So I understand that, look, the Ravens dealt with a ton of injuries last year. And with those guys coming back, it's almost like you have other, I guess, like free agent additions coming in. They aren't really free agent additions, but like Dobbins didn't play and Peters and Edwards, they didn't play. Ronnie Stanley played one game, and the offensive line with him not in there looks very, very different. So I think the Ravens have the talent to hang with a lot of these teams in the AFC North and be right in the thick of the division crown.
Yeah, and I mean, they did go 8-9. Not a lot of teams can say that they suffered that many injuries, but are still in a place where, losing 3 of their games by just 3 points there or less. So I think that you could say a floor for a team like this is that, okay, we give them 3 more games. They don't have their schedule is a little bit difficult in that, I know they also play Russell Wilson Broncos, they play the Saints, they play Tampa. They're already in the AFC North, you're in the AFC let alone. So, and you're also playing, the AFC East, I think, this year. So you're going against 3 teams who now have winning records that we're not used to coming into this season, which is different. So what do you think the most difficult thing for this team will be next year? Like, what can limit them if you had to target one thing?
Oh, I definitely think injuries is one of them. But if we're taking injuries out of the equation, I think it's just getting guys back up to speed. I think they're going to be relying on the health of a lot of the guys that they were missing last year. So Dobbins, Edwards, Peters, Stanley, etc. Even guys like Tyus Bowser suffered a torn Achilles in week 18. So it was like a terrible bow wrapping on a terrible injury season for them. So if they have to miss a lot of those guys early on and they're still kind of trying to find where they can fit in different depth pieces in the absence of them, maybe they could struggle a bit early on. Their schedule, they play the AFC East this year. They play all 4 AFC East teams in the first 4 weeks. They get it all out of the way in the first month of the season. So the Bills are in there, and the Patriots and the Jets. The Ravens go to the Meadowlands twice, play the Jets and the Giants, so they'll be traveling there quite a bit. But I think that for the Ravens, if they have to work without Dobbins and Edwards for an extended amount of time, work without Peters again for an extended amount of time, I think they position themselves better to be able to nullify those absences and be like, all right, we have the depth to because with the Ravens last year, the tackle depth was just not great. They didn't really invest in it a lot. Alejandro Villanueva was one of the worst tackles in the league, and it was just every play, it felt like Lamar Jackson was getting just honed in on by those 2 tackles because they were just giving up their assignment. So if they have to work without those guys for the first couple weeks, they get off to a slow start there. That might be what hinders them. But if those guys can come back 100% healthy, I think that they're in a much better situation.
Yeah, I think they are. And I think, like you said, and this is something that especially fantasy owners tend to do is, you forget about these players because you haven't seen them for a little bit. But everyone forgets that going into last season, I mean, the Ravens were very highly talked about. Had they not had these injuries, we're talking about a team that could have made a very strong run. I think next year they can do just that if they do stay healthy. And another thing that's interesting about the AFC North as I look into, this division is a lot of this division, I think, and you can stop me if you disagree or how you feel about this, is a lot of it's going to run through these defenses. And I think that the Ravens are also something that people forget about. It's a really strong, hard-hitting, suffocating defensive roster. They have a nice defensive roster. Their secondary could easily be one of the best, in the entire league. If not, there's arguments to be had now. And there's a new defensive coordinator. As a Giants fan, we brought over Martindale. So talk to me about Mike McDonald and how their defense is going to look next year. Because it might look a little different, but I do think that pressure is still going to be this main philosophy for them. But there might be different looks in the secondary moving forward.
Right. I don't think there's going to be a total shift to just all new things. They're going to keep some of the principles that Don Martindale did install in Baltimore, and Mike McDonald was with the team. He went to Michigan for the last year and had a lot of success in a Power 5 program, which was great for him. He brought over David Ojabo from Michigan, so the connection is there for those guys. But yeah, McDonald was very highly regarded, very young too, very, very young, but a bright football mind. And I think the thing that I'm excited for is just seeing how he utilizes these players in this defense in terms of versatility. The Ravens love to draft players who can play all over the field. And they're not a team that plays base defense all the time. So they like to play 6 DBs or 3 safeties and bring pressure from all these weird angles, rush DBs up the middle. And I remember, the first week of 2020, the Ravens on the 3rd play of the season dropped Calais Campbell back into coverage. He almost had an interception. It's like a 6'8" guy with these hands. So what they love to do is just confuse defenses, and especially young quarterbacks. The Ravens' first-year guys, second-year guys, for the first time seeing them, those quarterbacks struggled. Joe Burrow in his first game against the Ravens had one of his worst games of his career. Now 2021 was a very different story, but Justin Herbert, same thing. Last year, he was in the MVP conversation for the first month and a half of the year. He plays the Ravens, has a not so great game, and we don't really hear from him in the MVP conversation for the rest of the season. So I think that for this defense, simulating pressures are going to be huge, being able to free up guys. The sack numbers under Martindale were pretty inconsistent. Very high pressure team overall, but just getting the quarterback down was a bit of an issue. They didn't really have interior pressure. So I think what we'll see from them is just more emphasis on getting the quarterback down, generating pressure. And through that, their secondary was one of the worst in the league last year because of all the injuries they suffered. But now with the turnaround that they can have with all these players added, Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton and Kyle Fuller, I think they can turn that around. So if they can use their secondary strength, which I think McDonald will do, if they can use that to be able to get some coverage sacks and to make the quarterback a bit uncomfortable, I think that will be the key for them, Mike McDonald.
Yeah, and I think something that's parallel between the draft and between free agency, because again, you look at it and maybe people that don't follow the team notice that, I mean, it's not just that they're getting starters, it's just this quality of starters. You're adding so much depth to a team that when everyone is already healthy, they'll probably have a little bit of PTSD from all that trauma having everyone get injured, but they're in a really good spot. Is there reports coming out of camp? What's the timeline on some of these guys that are really vital to their success?
Yeah, they've been very hush-hush on that. They're not a team that likes to disclose all that, and I know a lot of teams don't. But we have heard that J.K. Dobbins is out there just, stationary catching footballs from the jugs machine. It feels like he's a bit closer than Gus Edwards right now. If I had to say, I'm not a doctor, I'll preface it with that. But I think that when looking at all these guys, there is, I'd say, optimism, but they don't want to guarantee anything. It's, this guy will be back by August 25th, right? They don't want to guarantee any of that stuff. But ACL injuries, the medicine's gotten better for it. So some guys come back, and we saw with the Achilles injuries, Cam Akers came back in like 4 or 5 months for the Rams, and the Ravens have a couple of those guys now with Tyus Bowser, who suffered that injury in January, and then David Ojabo, who suffered it at his pro day. So I think for most of these guys, what the Ravens are hoping for is obviously before week 1, but if they have to bleed into the season a bit, maybe they miss the first 2 games, 3 games. They don't want to rush them, as I've said before. So hopefully they'll be back before week 1, but if they have to spend a couple weeks on the sideline just to fully get back and feel confident, I think that would be totally fine.
Yeah, that actually sounds awesome, especially for, I'd love my running backs to get back on my dynasty teams here, but talk to me. I know not everyone loves to do these, but record prediction, where do you see this team? What's their ceiling? Because I really think that they could make a run for it. And yes, that's bearing health, and I understand that. But I think what they did was very methodical this offseason, especially with some of the releases that they had. It's not a full transitional period, but that's why, I admire teams like this. And I like the way that they run, especially being a Giants fan, is you're not looking for this massive amount of turnover that's going to disrupt the entire building. Yes, was last year not what, Ravens fans would have liked to see? Probably. But again, you won 8 games. There's some teams that can't do that. They can't lose starters like that. And they've gone out and been very intentional what they did to add on guys that are going to help them, have the success I think they could have. So what do you think their ceiling is this year?
Yeah, I think their ceiling, if I had to put a record prediction, I'd say 14-3. If you want to go absolute ceiling, probably 15-2. I mean, that's where I think this team can benefit. They are playing a last place schedule because they finished last in the AFC North. So that does include teams like the Jaguars and the Broncos. Now, you can't count out anybody in the league. It's every given Sunday. You can lose to any team, you can beat any team. But it does help that, the Bengals, the back half of the Bengals schedule this year is just brutal. They play the Chiefs and the Bills and all these teams. So if they can take advantage of that and win the games they're supposed to win while also going out there and playing the teams like the Bengals and the Bucs and all those teams tough, they have a chance with all these guys coming back. I guess the forgotten mindset that I feel like they have chips on their shoulders. They were not happy with how the season ended last year. Chuck Clark got up on that podium in week 18 after the Steelers game and literally took no questions and said, watch how we bounce back, and left. That's all he said. So they remember, and they remember what people said. The Ravens got torched by the Bengals twice last year. I mean, they did. Joe Burrow lit them up 2 times. They remember that. And the crazy part about it was the Ravens started 8-3. They were the top team in the AFC through 12 weeks, even with their injuries. And people were saying, how are they doing this? And obviously the 6-game losing streak, they lost a bunch of close games. Lamar Jackson gets injured. Marlon Humphrey gets injured. But I think absolute ceiling wise, you're looking at 14-3, 15-2. If you're looking at the very optimistic view, because it's just the pieces they're getting back, the health that they could have, and the pieces they added on to the depth they already had.
Yeah, and I think there's something too, as we talk about the Ravens being this very, as we normally know, they're just a very run-heavy offense. They obviously were able to just kind of band-aid what they were lacking in the run game through the passing game, but we have yet to really see the Lamar Jackson-Bateman chemistry yet. They had, I believe Bateman, you could correct me, somewhere around week 4, week 6, did he get injured? And then Lamar about week 14, then he goes out. So it's this back and forth. They haven't had time to really be on the field together. And I think there's something to not even strengthening, because I wouldn't call their pass game weak, but I think there's something to playing complementary football that they're going to be in such a good position to do. And I think people, a lot of teams, we haven't seen this team all together yet. It's going to keep defenses very offense, because you don't know what this team has to offer yet. Totally.
Right. And it's funny because Bateman actually got injured before the season started. He returned in week 6.
That's right.
So,
okay, you're right.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
He came back, but he got the groin surgery, and it was just another injury on top of all the stuff they'd already been dealing with. So he missed the first 5 games, and then Lamar Jackson ended up missing past week 14. So they really, it was like the middle of the year they had together, but they didn't have the beginning of the year. They didn't have the end of the season. They've been establishing chemistry. Lamar Jackson has worked out with Bateman throughout the offseason at certain points. So they're getting the chemistry down, which is really important. But you're right. We haven't seen this team fully together. And I think that is another reason why, when you're looking at the Greg Roman offense, I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding Greg Roman in Baltimore, and that's putting it pretty lightly,
of
to
course.
be honest.
Yes.
But I think
it's why I avoided it.
Right. But part of the reason I think that Greg Roman is still with the Ravens is the fact that, one, I know I'm pretty neutral on the situation anyway, but we haven't seen what he can do with everybody. We haven't seen with Dobbins and with Bateman and with another year of Jackson. So while there are certainly flaws in his offense, ways he can improve as a play caller, I'm not, shying away from that. I do want to see what he can do. And if it doesn't work out, if the Ravens start slow, let's say like 2-4 or something, 1-3, then maybe we could see a change midseason. The Ravens aren't afraid to do that. They did it with Cam Cameron during the Super Bowl season, where they flipped offensive coordinators like week 12 or something, really late in the year. And they won the Super Bowl with Jim Caldwell. So I'm excited to see what this passing offense can do with Andrews and Bateman. Obviously, the loss of Brown, it does hurt a little bit. I can't sugarcoat that. But with the other guys too, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, Tyler Wallace, not necessarily household names, I'd say at this point, but guys who could make an impact. They feel confident in their guys. I think that at this point, personnel-wise, I'd anticipate them keeping 5 wideouts instead of 6, and then 4 running backs, just because I think their offense will go back to the run-heavy style. But you have to pass to win as well. You can't just run the ball 50 times and never pass and win.
Right.
So you have to be able to do that. Lamar Jackson is a good thrower. He's a great thrower of the football. So I'm excited to see what he can do in year 5.
I know, and they'll argue with that. So I'll ask you 2 questions before we head out. I want to just stay on a point, because what is the wide receiver room going to look like, I guess? How many of these guys make the roster? You do have my Benjamin Victor, who is one of my favorite guys coming out. Very disappointing me. I know. I don't know that he'll ever get his full chance, which I think if he did, he would have something to show. One of my favorite guys. I'm telling you, I have a tape that I don't know. I sent it out. This is when I first started out, where it was back-to-back between him and Plaxico Burress, and the similarities between them two. I adore him. So I have a feeling he will not make this roster, but what does it look like? Who, without them signing a vet, who is the wide receiver 2 here?
I think wide receiver 2-wise is Devin Duvernay, who was a 3rd-round pick out of Texas in 2020. Actually made all pro teams in the Pro Bowler, and it was a Pro Bowler as a return specialist. So the Ravens got a Pro Bowl wide receiver. It just wasn't actually at the wide receiver position. It was it's kind of a sneaky loophole there. But I think Benjamin Victor has a good shot to make it this year based off of just the personnel. Without adding a veteran, I think four wide receiver spots are locked up. You have Bateman, Duvernay, Tyler Wallace, and James Prochet. If they keep 5, Benjamin Victor has been with this team for a couple years. He's very liked in the locker room. He's also a huge wide receiver. He is a massive.
He's a big boy.
He's crazy big. And they need a big-bodied receiver. That's why Julio Jones makes so much sense, because he is that big-bodied contested catch player. They could also go with the speedster. I think big body is more important. I'd say 1A big body, 1B speedster to maybe like replace Marquise Brown in that production. But I think Duvernay could do some of that as a speedster. So Victor, with his huge body frame, contested catchability, he has a chance to make this roster. I think that there are other undrafted guys too, Shamar Bridges, Mekhi Polk, Devin Williams. There are a bunch of those, again, big-bodied, over 6'2", 6'3", 6'4" guys that they could look to. But I think that if they want experience, someone who's been around the team and he has a strong preseason, I think Benjamin Victor, also Jalen Moore, who's been there for a couple years, they could value that experience.
Yeah, and how much of a luxury is it to, just be like, it's okay, we're fine with our wide receivers, because there's so much talent across the entire board. I lied. I said I was going to ask you one more question. I'm going to ask two. Since you do play fantasy, why don't you give me the two guys on the Ravens that you think are worth for people to draft this year?
Oh, I absolutely think Rashod Bateman. Bateman is somebody who, again,
not
the household recognition name, and that's why you can get him late in your drafts because everyone's like, oh, okay, wide receiver one on the Ravens, they don't throw the ball. Why would I want this guy? Well, you should want him. I think he's gonna be so good this year. The Marquise Brown trade opens up so many targets on this team now. Some of those will go to Mark Andrews. Others will go to the running backs. But I think for what the Ravens can do passing the ball this year, I don't think it's going to be just all ground and pound the whole entire year where it's like they're never going to throw. I think they want to move to more of they're still a run-heavy team, definitely. But they want to make sure the pass game is also there and effective in keeping teams on their toes. So Bateman would be one for me. And then maybe a hot take, but I'm going to say Lamar Jackson. I mean, it feels
I love it. No, it's not.
After his end to the year, which was not strong, I will admit, I think people, again, it's like, what have you done for me now lately? And what Lamar Jackson did lately is not have a great end to his season, got injured, missed the final couple games of the year. So I think people are maybe a bit down on him going into fantasy drafts, whereas a fantasy player, I mean, he gets you obviously the passing yards, the passing touchdowns, is a runner. I mean, he gets you all the yards, all the touchdowns there. And with an improved running game, an improved offensive line, I think that him fully healthy in year 5, I think it'll be a great year for him. So he's not a guy who can get late in your drafts. Like, you're not going to find him in like the 12th round. But
it's not happening.
If you can get him early and other guys are going, like if Burrow's going earlier and Herbert's going earlier and all these guys, I think if you are still looking for a quarterback, you take running backs, wide receivers, tight ends early, and you get to like the 5th, 6th round, and Lamar Jackson's still there, I'd certainly take him. I think he has a great return value there. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And I think there's a lot to, you keep guys like Lamar Jackson who are heavy runners, very mobile. You keep them healthy by, drafting one of the best centers that we've seen in a very long time. You keep them healthy by having a complementary running and passing game, having both of those things into play rather than him having just kind of try to carry the team and then the defense picking up the slack. That's how you keep him healthy so that he can play the entire season for you and get those fantasy points that everyone wants. And we will end it on, give me one hot take you have for this season.
Oh, this is a good, I've thought about this one. And
I love it.
The AFC is so talented this year. Like, there are going to be probably 4 teams that just missed the playoffs completely despite having really good years. I'm going to say my bold prediction is the Ravens make at least the AFC Championship game. And if you want me to take it a step further and just go like off the wires bold, I'll say the Ravens will win the Super Bowl this year and shock the world.
I love it. I hope that they make it to the Super Bowl. What has it been? 29? How many? 29 years since something?
No, only they last made it 2012, 2013 with Flacco.
When they win? When did they win though?
They won that year. They won in 2013.
They did? Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh, it's been a while. So I wish them the best luck. I'm excited for this team. This is an interesting division. I'm glad to round it out with the Ravens. Why don't you let everyone know they can find you?
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Oestreicher34. I also do host and produce a Locked on Ravens podcast 5 days a week. It's on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast. So if you prefer video or audio form, I also write for the Ravens WR managing editor over there. So very, very Ravens oriented over here. Thanks so much for having me on. This was really fun.
Of course, it was a blast. I'll have to have you on. We'll go over, do it maybe a little bit halfway through the season. I'm thinking of having everyone back on so we can chop it out. This is going to be a very fun division to watch. And thank you guys for watching. We'll finish up with the Bengals this week, and then we're done with the AFC North. See you guys.